So I've been looking for inspiration on stuff to talk about, because for me, there's so much stuff I want to talk about. The idea of like knowing that like one person is interested in hearing more about this idea makes it more worthwhile to pursue. So I'm just going to steal. Okay, so Sylvan asked this interesting question about the collective unconscious. Let me just talk about that for a little bit and see what useful stuff I can get out of that. And can someone explain why the archetypes of the collective unconscious was so brilliant and transformative? It hasn't really sunk in for me yet, but everyone raves about it. Archetypes of the collective unconscious. And this is interesting to talk about because it's something I've been interested in for the past, since like 2016, the past 10 years, I guess. I guess the first thing to understand about some Jungian concepts, especially the collective unconscious or the I Ching or archetypes in general, is that it's not really a metaphysical concept. Like, he's not necessarily describing rules of the universe. He's describing rules of human understanding of the universe, which is important to note. Of like, these are psychological concepts. These aren't necessarily like metaphysical or spiritual concepts, although some people can see the place for those things. You don't have to believe in that part necessarily to see it as a pattern and a framework to look at humanity through. It's hard to talk about archetypes of the collective unconscious without talking about the history of like storytelling and myth making in cultures across humanity. Joseph Campbell has done really interesting work that I'm going to paraphrase poorly, but essentially there's a hero's journey myth. There's like a myth shape. There are archetypical shapes of storytelling that co-appear across cultures and across continents and across, different modalities of thinking, that this concept of like leaving home and gathering knowledge and being changed by it and then returning home with that knowledge changed is kind of a universal story. So this is worth talking about because it's just people looking at patterns. It's like a meta study, right, of all storytelling, looking at patterns and seeing like what are the patterns that reemerge across storytelling. And it's also the understanding that storytelling is a conveyance of generational knowledge, right? There's a reason that we told these stories to our children. It wasn't just for entertainment usually. Sometimes it was both entertainment and wisdom and morality. But a lot of what we do in our storytelling is tell people about how the world works. It's like a description of what we see around us. And through that lens, like seeing archetypes that emerge for me was really clarifying, because once you start to see the stories that get told, you see how much stories and narrative impact the decisions that you make every day, right? Like, I am this type of person. I fit in this place and culture. For me, I'm a hacker. That means that I gotta type really fast on the computer and I gotta know all the commands, and I stay up late and I drink caffeinated drinks, and like there's all these like lifestyle things that aren't directly related to like, oh, I like computers, therefore I like to have a shirt that says nothing like 127.0.0.1. You know what I mean? Like there's a hacker archetype that I fell into, right? That's easy to fall into, and there's a reason for that. Like when you're 14 years old and you're looking for a structure, when you're trying to figure out like who you are and your place in this world, like there's all these recipes that you can go towards. And those are archetypes. It's worth studying those patterns because they impact the day-to-day so much. Okay, and so the collective unconscious, I was going to say no one is actively choosing an archetype, but many people are. That's the process of self-discovery that happens, from the years of 10 until 30. Probably a lifetime. I can only report on the data I have so far. And when you study archetypes, it's important to understand that like an archetype isn't locked. Like it's a storytelling method, like self-storytelling method, and it changes throughout time and throughout the day, right? Like maybe in youth you have a caregiver archetype because of the people that you're surrounded by, and maybe later you try to have more of an architect archetype or a professor archetype, or you like graduate into something that for your ego feels a bit more. My cat is in my neighbor's yard. He should not. Meow. Meow. He shouldn't be back there. That's illegal. My cat is trespassing. He doesn't care at all. What was I talking about? Archetypes? Collective unconscious? Oh my god, so why do we care about Jung and the collective unconscious as people who care about computers? It's kind of all intertwined. I have to tell a story. That's kind of important to all of this, unfortunately. And it's not going to make a ton of sense until I tell the whole story. Alright, so it's like 2015 or 2016, and I'm working in New York City. I'm kind of like learning how to spend time in the city, and I'm like poking around in different shops and neighborhoods, and I find this like spiritual crystal religious shop on, I think it was 14th Street, and I go in there and I kind of just wander around, and I'm in this mode of just like going towards whatever sparks joy for me at the time, right? So I'm just like kind of like, the crystals are kind of cool, these like coins are kind of cool, these books are kind of cool, and I reach down, there's like a book, a really nice copy of the I Ching that I find myself gravitating towards, and I grab it, and I don't know how I knew I needed 3 coins to throw it with, so I grabbed 3 coins as well. And so I got the book, and I got my 3 coins, and I got my little bag. And so I hop on the subway home, and I start to read the introduction to the book. And for me, from the subway, from the bookshop to my house is like half an hour. And this is almost like perfectly timed to read this introduction. And I'm reading it, and it's good. Like, I'm really starting to relate to it. It's talking about like how the I Ching is used. And he's talking a bit about synchronicity and the place of the I Ching in understanding or using it as a framework to analyze synchronicity in a moment. And I'm like, that's really cool. And I get to the end, and the introduction is written by Carl Jung. And in the beginning of this book, this was like Chinese wisdom, ancient Chinese wisdom, 64 hexagrams. They used to throw it with the arrow sticks, right? So what is this figure who's like already been on my radar floating in time doing in this book that I just gravitated to? And then the more important lesson is that the thing I was inside was what was being described. Like, I was in a synchronicity. I'm reading a synchronicity in a book that I found, right? And it's not that it's magic, it's that like my mind was attuned to that frequency at that point in time. And what is the name of that phenomena? That's a useful function to think about the world. We are used to, as programmers, thinking in symbols, thinking in boiled down models of things that maybe lose some of the resolution. Obviously, you can, in order to map a territory properly, you need to make it one-to-one. In order to map a complex system, you need to make an equally complex system of describing and measuring it. Archetypes obviously are lower resolution, but I think that as programmers, we understand the power in boiling down symbols that you can then use for understanding or operations, and that really is what archetypes are in many ways. And it's just a new framework of seeing the world, and seeing things that people like. It's tooling that people use to build stories about themselves and the world around them that come through TV shows and radio and news reports, and like constantly these archetypes are reinforced. Like the archetype of like a bum, right? The archetype of a person who is scary. These are tools that are used every day by people to like change the world. So it's not to be ignored necessarily. Even if you don't feel drawn to some of the like woo-woo aspects of it, like there's value in like just having a framework to see the world through. And archetypes show up in all sorts of different places. A lot of people are drawn to astrology, right? Like they want a story of a structure of being to give them a little bit of shape. I'm a Scorpio, so I must be like that. You're a Gemini, so you must be like that. Oh, that's such a Taurus thing to do, right? These are archetypes, but if you believe in them, then maybe that shapes who you are. Like, if I fully believe in what a Scorpio person is, did that not self-manifest like hyperstition, and I became a Scorpio person because that was the name and the archetype that was given to me? I think those effects are really powerful, right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of, the type of person that becomes a nurse or a doctor, the type of person that becomes a criminal or a police officer or a prison guard, right? These are archetypical ways of being that extend beyond your job. Like you need a way of capturing that personality type that comes with a bunch of additional attributes that it's worth quantifying. And it's really cool once you start looking through, the I Ching or through the archetypes. Like, you can see, it's like you're seeing the source code of the narrative structure of society, right? You can see the tools that are being used, like subunits, the little atomic units of storytelling. And seeing things in a new way is really powerful. Like, I got really into this bridge building simulator game, and it was awesome. But it had this unintended impact when, like, I would start going over bridges and be like, oh damn, they did this one good. Like, once I knew how hard it was to do the thing, or like once I started to see the inner structures, I started to like reappreciate the world around me, and archetypes do that a bunch. There is, the idea of a collective unconscious. There's this well of narrative structures that we pull from. I don't think it's hard to argue with that. Even just as a storyteller, like, this is a pattern manifest, right? It's like pattern to identify a collective effort to identify the patterns of human behavior. Anthropology through a slightly different lens. Anthropology through narrative instead of information and data and quantifiable data collection. It's like this other form of wisdom that's coexisted the whole time along with it. And like, why has it lasted that long is an interesting question. Probably the answer is probably because it's useful in some way for some people. Maybe for you. I hope I'm making any sense. I should do like a whole other video on the I Ching and the power of hexagrams and Leibniz and the ways in which like computing descends from the I Ching and from a hexagram way of seeing the world. Hexagrams themselves are made up of binary units, representations of yin and yang. It's really interesting that there are 64 archetypes in the I Ching. If you know anything about computers, you'll recognize that number. This is a low resolution, but still pretty high resolution way of seeing the world. They transform into each other in really interesting ways. And it is not a big leap. And if you look at the history, there's a literal leap where Leibniz is reading these Chinese texts on the I Ching while he's deciding and imagining this concept of binary, of on and off, yin and yang. And Jung, I think, is a person who gave those ideas a lot more credence than anyone else at the time. It seems like woo-woo, and maybe it could be racist Orientalism of, it seems like Chinese medicine, or, it's non-Western, right? It's measuring this thing that's immeasurable. It's a vibe measurer. It's a framework for understanding vibes of people and times. And for me as a human being, I think you notice that some days are different from others. You can kind of feel it in your gut, and maybe it's the chemicals in your brain, but sometimes it really is like the weather of the world, not the like literal weather, which is in fact affected by things. It might be that it's high tide and the barometric pressure is low and your bones ache, but I think there is like a weather of society as well, a weather of the zeitgeist, a weather of narrative and archetypes and times of change. And some of these are measured in our economy, and some of these are measured in our GDP, and some of these are like immeasurable vibes. In the West, we don't really have a lot of tools and frameworks to understand besides like polling or, just the research of going out and talking to people. That's what journalists do, or are supposed to be doing. That's what they used to do. So anyway, a framework to understand these mechanisms is incredibly valuable. And then once, I've been looking at the world through this lens for 10 years, and maybe it's that thing of like when you buy a car, you're all of a sudden seeing cars of the same make and color on the road because you just weren't looking for them before. But for me, you start to see the world line up in ways that the idea of the collective unconscious and archetypes kind of predict.